This presentation explores mature themes and depictions of violence from folklore and mythology. Viewer discretion is advised. Imagine you are walking a silent path in ancient Japan. The moon is a silver scar in the ink-black sky. From the woods ahead you hear a sound. Not the snap of a twig, but the wet, percussive crack of a massive bone. It is followed by a low, guttural growl that seems to vibrate in your very soul. You freeze. Out of the shadows, a figure emerges, and your mind struggles to comprehend what you are seeing. It stands over 10 feet tall, its skin the color of dried blood, with muscles coiled like massive pythons. Two jagged horns tear through the skin of its forehead, and its mouth is a hellish cavern filled with fangs like daggers. In one hand it grips a colossal iron club, spiked and stained with something dark. This is not an animal. This is not a man. This is an oni. For centuries, these creatures have been the absolute bedrock of terror in Japan. They are the ogres in the dark, the titans of nightmare, the personification of brutal, overwhelming force. But the single most terrifying fact about the oni isn't their strength, their fangs, or their insatiable appetite for destruction. The most terrifying fact is that they were not born this way. Every single one of these godlike monsters was once a human being. That is the central, horrifying mystery of the oni. They are not simply demons from another dimension. They are the final, twisted destination of a human soul. They are what happens when a person becomes so consumed by rage, jealousy, or pure, unadulterated evil that they shed their own humanity and are reborn as a living catastrophe. So the question that will haunt us through this entire journey is not what an oni is, but how. How does a person, a soul, cross that impossible line? And what does it say about the darkness that might be lurking inside all of us? To the Western mind, the word demon conjures images of fallen angels, of Lucifer and his legions from the pits of Christian hell. But the oni are something else entirely. They are more primal, more elemental. They are a force of nature as much as a malevolent entity. The classic image is seared into the Japanese cultural consciousness. A gigantic, muscular humanoid, often with red or blue skin, symbolizing their raw, untamed power. They wear little more than a tiger skin loincloth, a trophy from a beast powerful enough to challenge them. And of course there is the weapon, the iconic kanabo, a massive iron-studded club. There is even a Japanese proverb, oni enai kanabo, which means an oni with an iron club. It's their version of saying unbeatable, or invincible. It's giving ultimate power to a creature that was already the definition of ultimate power. But to think of them as just mindless brutes is a fatal mistake. Their strength is legendary, capable of leveling buildings and crushing armies. Their bodies are nearly indestructible, shrugging off blades and arrows as if they were mosquito bites. Many possess formidable magic, capable of summoning lightning, transforming into other shapes, or flying through the air. They are cunning, cruel, and intelligent. They are the perfect predator, combining the strategic mind of a wicked human with the overwhelming physical power of a natural disaster. So where did this idea come from? To understand the oni, we must first journey to a place of unimaginable suffering, the Japanese Buddhist underworld, Jigoku. This isn't the simple fire and brimstone hell you might be familiar with. Jigoku is a complex, multi-level bureaucracy of torment, a series of realms designed to purify wicked souls through excruciating pain. And who are the guards? Who are the jailers and the torturers in this cosmic prison? The oni. They are the loyal, terrifying foot soldiers of the great King Enma, the supreme judge of the dead. When a soul arrives for judgment, King Enma consults his records, and if the verdict is guilty, he gestures to his oni. It is they who drag the screaming souls to their designated hell. It is the oni who wield the instruments of torture. They flay the skin from liars, crush the bones of thieves, and boil the greedy in cauldrons of molten metal. They are the terrifying face of divine retribution, the enforcers of karma. In this context, they aren't just chaotic monsters. They have a purpose, a job. They are a necessary part of the cosmic order, a gruesome but essential tool for maintaining balance. They are the consequence. But this cosmic role still doesn't explain the most unsettling part of their legend, their human origin. The souls they torture in Jigoku are on a path to eventual reincarnation. But some humans are so profoundly evil, so utterly irredeemable in life, that they are beyond even the cleansing fires of hell. Their souls are too stained, too heavy with malice. Upon death, these souls do not become prisoners of the oni. They become the oni, Their mortal wickedness crystallizes, transforming them into the very demons that punish others. A cruel, power-hungry warlord who spent his life slaughtering innocents might be reborn as a hulking red-skinned Oni. His lust for power now a literal monstrous hunger. His soul is not punished. His soul becomes the punishment. This transformation, however, is not reserved solely for the dead. The true horror of the Oni mythos is that the change can happen to the living. It is believed that a human being who allows themselves to be completely overcome by a single, powerful negative emotion can trigger this monstrous metamorphosis. Think of a consuming, soul-shattering jealousy. A rage so profound it burns away all reason. A grief so deep it curdles into pure hatred for the world. When these emotions reach a tipping point, they can act like a spiritual poison, warping not just the soul, but the physical body. The person's humanity is annihilated, burned away by the sheer force of their own passion, and in its place an Oni is born. Imagine a nobleman betrayed and dishonored by his rivals. He stews in his own fury day after day, year after year. He dreams only of vengeance. His prayers are not to the gods for justice, but to the darkness for power. Slowly, something inside him begins to change. His heart hardens, his empathy vanishes, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. One night, under a blood-red moon, the transformation completes. His frame swells with unnatural muscle, his skin darkens to the color of a storm cloud, and horns erupt from his skull. The man is gone. All that remains is the living embodiment of his own hatred, an Oni now possessing the strength to enact the brutal revenge he craved, 100 times over. This is the chilling core of the Oni legend. They are a warning about the monstrous potential that lies dormant within human emotion. They represent the ultimate loss of self-control, the terrifying idea that if you let your inner demons consume you, you might just become one for real. They are not an external evil to be fought, but an internal corruption to be feared. They are the walking, talking, village-destroying embodiment of our own worst impulses. The Oni of hell, born from the souls of the damned, and the Oni of earth, born from the passions of the living, represent the two great origins of this terrifying species. One is a matter of cosmic judgment, the other a tragedy of personal failing, but both result in the same thing: a creature of unimaginable power and cruelty, unleashed upon the world. The stories tell of them descending from mountains to raid villages, carrying off treasure, livestock, and people to feast upon in their hidden lairs. They are the antagonists in 1,000 fairy tales, the ultimate test for Japan's greatest heroes. But the Oni who serve in hell are, for the most part, contained. They have a role to play in the grand machinery of the afterlife. The true chaos begins when these creatures break their chains. What happens when the guardians of hell escape their realm and begin to walk among us? What happens when the monster at the gate is suddenly at your own door? To answer that, we have to understand a terrifying cosmic loophole. Not all Oni are born in the fiery pits of Jigoku. Some of the most powerful, the most malevolent, were once human. Think of the most twisted soul you can imagine. A warlord drunk on power, a merchant consumed by greed, a person so completely possessed by jealousy or rage that their very humanity curdles. When a soul that wicked dies, it doesn't just get punished in hell, it gets promoted. It becomes a part of the punishment. The sheer force of its negative emotion is so potent, it transforms, twisting flesh and spirit into a demonic form. These are the Oni that remember what it was like to be human, which makes them infinitely more dangerous. They know our fears, our weaknesses, our desires, and they are the ones most likely to find their way back. They climb out of the underworld, drawn back to the mortal plane by the echoes of their own unfinished business, their lingering attachments, or simply an insatiable hunger for the life they lost. And when they arrive, they are no longer bound by human laws or the cosmic order of hell. They are pure, concentrated chaos. An Oni walking the earth is a natural disaster with a name and a face. They are a hurricane of muscle and malice, a plague with a purpose. They topple temples, shatter armies, and feast on the very people who once feared them in life. They become the boogeymen in the dark, the cautionary tales whispered to children, the living embodiments of humanity's worst impulses given monstrous form and supernatural power. And there is no greater example of this horrifying transformation, of this demonic chaos unleashed, than the story of the most infamous Oni to ever walk the islands of Japan. A creature so powerful, so cunning, and so utterly depraved that his name has been spoken with fear for over 1,000 years. His name is Shutendoji, the drunken demon, the king of the Oni. His story is the answer to the question. This is what happens when the monster at the gate is at your door. Before he was a demon king, he was a boy. But what kind of boy, no one can quite agree. Some legends say he was the child of a great dragon and a human princess, a cursed hybrid from birth. Others, more chillingly, say he was entirely human, born in the late 10th century near Kyoto. But even as a child, there was a darkness in him. He was unnaturally strong, unervingly intelligent, and possessed a temper that was nothing short of volcanic. He was an outcast from the start. Too wild for society, too monstrous for his peers. The most popular version of his origin is perhaps the most tragic. He was sent to be an acolyte at a monastery on Mount High, a place of peace and enlightenment. But peace was not in his nature. He hated the discipline, the prayers, the pious monks. He drank, breaking the monastery's sacred rules, and found that alcohol had a strange effect on him. It didn't just make him drunk, it made him stronger, fueling the rage that was always simmering just beneath his skin. He was a prodigy of negativity. During a festival, he donned a demon mask to play a prank on his fellow monks. But when the festival ended, the mask wouldn't come off. It had fused to his face, a physical manifestation of the monster he was becoming on the inside. Cast out, abandoned by his mother, and rejected by the heavens, he fled into the wilderness, a monster in the making. He was no longer human. He was something more and something far, far less. He wandered Japan, his power growing with every bitter thought, every resentful memory. He eventually found his way to Mount Oi, a rugged, mist-shrouded mountain range on the border of Tamba province, and it was here that he began to build his empire. Mount Oi became his fortress, a hell on earth. Shutendoji wasn't a lone monster hiding in a cave. He was a king. He sent out a call, a psychic beacon of pure malevolence that attracted the lost and the damned from all corners of the country. Other Oni, rogue yokai, and twisted spirits flocked to his banner. He was charismatic, brilliant, and utterly terrifying. A perfect leader for an army of nightmares. They built a massive palace of dark iron on the mountain peak, a place of constant, debauched revelry. From this demonic stronghold, Shutendoji and his gang began to terrorize the countryside. At first, it was just travelers and local villagers who went missing. But his ambition grew. He set his sights on the grand capital, Heiankyo, modern-day Kyoto, the heart of Imperial Japan. His Oni would sweep down from the mountain under the cover of darkness, silent and swift, snatching their victims from the city's very streets. Their targets were always the same, the young, beautiful daughters of the noble court. They would vanish from their locked chambers without a trace, leaving behind nothing but terror and a chilling mystery. The capital was paralyzed with fear. No one was safe. The aristocracy, the most powerful people in the land, were helpless. Their wealth and their samurai guards meant nothing to creatures who could walk through walls and vanish into shadow. Whispers spread of the horrors that awaited the kidnapped women. Shutendoji and his lieutenants weren't just killers. They were gourmands of terror. They would drain their victims of their blood, drinking it from sake cups, and then they would feast on the raw flesh. This wasn't just murder. This was a direct assault on the cosmic order, on the emperor himself. The capital, the center of civilization and divine authority, was being used as a personal larder for a demon king. The emperor's prayers to the gods went unanswered. His best warriors were baffled. The city was under siege by an enemy it couldn't see and couldn't fight. The morale of the nation was collapsing. For years, this reign of terror continued. The demon of Mount Oi became the ultimate nightmare. He was more than a monster. He was a symbol of chaos triumphing over order, of savagery desecrating civilization. He was proof that for all their poetry, their art, and their gods, humanity was still just prey. Finally, the emperor, pushed to the brink, knew that conventional methods had failed. He needed more than soldiers. He needed heroes. He summoned the single greatest warrior of the age, a man whose name was a legend in its own right. Minamoto no Reiko. Reiko was the ideal hero, a brilliant strategist, a fearless warrior, and a man of unshakable loyalty to the emperor. And he did not fight alone. He was always accompanied by his four most trusted retainers, the Shitenno, or the four heavenly kings. Each was a legendary warrior in his own right. Yusui Sadamitsu, Arabe no Sute, Kintaro, and Watanabe no Tsuna. They were the special forces of ancient Japan. a team of demon slayers who had faced down countless supernatural threats. The emperor gave them a divine mandate: go to Mount Oi, find the Iron Palace of Shuten Doji, and destroy the Demon King and his entire army. And the nightmare. It was a suicide mission. An army of men had failed to even find the fortress, let alone breach it. How could 5 warriors possibly succeed where legions had failed? They weren't just marching against a band of monsters. They were marching into the heart of a living hell, to face a king who was once a man, but was now the embodiment of pure, unadulterated evil. Reiko and his men knew the odds. They knew they were likely walking to their deaths. But they also knew that the fate of the entire nation rested on their shoulders. And so, disguised as humble mountain priests, they took their first steps on the road to Mount Oi, on the road to glory or the grave. The road was a ribbon of dust and stone, winding through ancient forests where the canopy was so thick, daylight struggled to pierce the gloom. Beneath the simple, coarse robes of wandering ascetics, Reiko and his 4 loyal retainers felt the cold, hard weight of their armor. Each piece was a secret, a promise of violence hidden under a veneer of peace. Their topknots were cut, their faces smudged with dirt to complete the disguise of Yamabushi mountain priests who had renounced the world. But they had renounced nothing. They were walking towards the world's ugliest heart, to cut it out. The deception was a heavy cloak. They carried the traditional staves and wore the small black caps of holy men, but their hands, calloused from a lifetime of gripping sword hilts, felt alien and clumsy holding prayer beads. They were the 4 heavenly kings, the Shitenno, the most celebrated warriors of their generation. Watanabe no Tsuna, the unbreakable wall. Sakata no Kentoki, the wild boy raised by a mountain witch possessing the strength of a bear. Arabe no Sutake and Yuzui Sadamitsu, masters of strategy and the bow. And leading them, Minamoto no Reiko, a man whose name alone was a weapon. They were living legends forced to act as humble beggars, praying for passage when every instinct screamed to draw steel. Days bled into one another. They crossed rushing rivers and scaled treacherous mountain passes. The closer they got to Oi, the more the land itself seemed to grow sick. The trees grew twisted and black, the air grew thin and cold, and a profound silence settled over the landscape, a silence that felt heavier than stone, as if the very birds and insects had fled in terror. It was in this oppressive quiet that they met the 3 old men. They appeared as if from the mist itself, standing by the side of the path. They were woodsmen, their faces deeply lined like the bark of ancient trees, their backs bent with age. But their eyes held a clarity, a sharpness that defied their frail forms. Reiko, ever cautious, bowed his head. "Greetings, elders. We are but poor priests who have lost our way. We seek shelter." The first old man smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "You are not lost, Minamoto no Reiko. You are precisely where you are meant to be." The blood in Reiko's veins turned to ice. Their disguises, so carefully constructed, had been seen through in an instant. His hand instinctively moved towards the hidden hilt of his sword. "Peace, warrior," the second old man said, his voice like the rustling of leaves. "We are not your enemies. We are here to aid you. The evil of Shuten Doji has reached even the heavens, and the gods will not stand for it." The men revealed themselves not as simple woodsmen, but as manifestations of the great gods themselves: Hachiman, the god of war; Sumiyoshi, the protector of travelers; and Kumano, the deity of the sacred mountains they walked upon. They knew the warrior's quest was righteous, but they also knew that mortal strength alone would not be enough to vanquish an evil as old and powerful as Shuten Doji. And so they had brought gifts. The first was a flask of sake, the divine rice wine of the gods. "This is Jinbin Kidokushu," the god explained. "Sake of divine power, poison to demons. To you it will be the finest drink you have ever tasted, granting you strength and courage. But to an Oni it will be a potent poison, robbing them of their magic, binding their limbs, and rendering them as helpless as newborns." This was their key. Not a blade but a beverage. Deception wrapped in deception. Next, they presented Reiko with an ornate helmet of starred iron. "Shuten Doji is a creature of immense power," they warned. "His strength is matched only by his cunning. This helmet will protect your mind from his demonic influence, and your skull from his iron club." Finally, they gave the warriors a coil of impossibly strong rope. No ordinary chain can hold a demon lord. This rope was forged in the celestial rivers, and will bind him fast when the moment comes. With their blessings and their warnings echoing in their ears, Reiko and his men continued their journey, their spirits bolstered but their minds reeling from the divine encounter. They were no longer just soldiers on a mission from the Emperor, they were now instruments of divine will. The stakes had been raised to a cosmic level. Soon they saw it. Rising from the jagged peaks of Mount Oi like a black iron fong, was the fortress of the Oni. Oni Jejo. It wasn't built so much as it was vomited onto the landscape, a chaotic jumble of grim towers and oppressive walls, forged from black unearthly metal that seemed to drink the very light from the sky. No banners flew from its ramparts, only the tattered remains of kimonos and armor, gruesome trophies from their victims. A foul coppery smog hung over the palace, the stench of stale blood and cooked meat carried on the wind. As they drew nearer, they came to a river that flowed from the base of the mountain. But the water wasn't clear. It was a murky, sluggish red, stained with the gore of the Oni's endless feasting. And there on the riverbank was a sight of chilling beauty. A young woman, no older than 17, was washing a blood-soaked kimono in the crimson water. She was stunningly beautiful, but her eyes were hollow, filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. Reiko approached cautiously. "Pardon me, miss. Can you tell us what place this is?" The woman looked up and for a moment, the mask of sorrow fell away, replaced by a flicker of something ancient and predatory. It was gone in a flash. She spoke, her voice a tragic whisper. "This is the palace of Shuten Doji. I am one of his captives, forced to serve him. You are priests. You must flee. If he finds you here, he will devour you." But Reiko and his men held their ground, feigning exhaustion and desperation. "We have traveled for weeks and are weary to the bone," Reiko pleaded. "We ask only for a single night's shelter. We are men of peace. We will be no trouble." The woman, an Oni in disguise they knew, seemed to consider this. A cruel, calculating light danced in her eyes. Fresh meat delivered right to their doorstep. What a treat for her master. "Very well," she said, her voice now holding a syrupy sweetness. "Our Lord is generous. He enjoys novel company. Follow me. But I warn you, do as you are told, and you may live to see the dawn." She led them through a massive iron gate that groaned open as if in pain. And then they were inside. The courtyard was a nightmare landscape of bleached bones and shattered weapons. Hulking figures moved in the shadows. Oni of all shapes and sizes, their skin red, blue and black, their faces twisted into masks of brutal cruelty. Horns jutted from their heads and massive fangs dripped with saliva as they eyed the newcomers. The air was thick with the roar of their voices and the clang of their iron clubs. Hundreds of them. Reiko and his 4 companions were 5 men, surrounded by an army of monsters in the heart of their own fortress. They had successfully passed the first test. They had walked into the mouth of hell. And at the far end of the great hall, seated upon a throne of skulls and drinking sake from a massive bowl, was him, Shuten Doji. He was larger than the others, his mane of wild red hair like a roaring fire, his horns like polished obsidian. He watched the 5 small, robed figures approach, a lazy, arrogant smile spreading across his monstrous face. He saw 5 lost little sheep stumbling into his den. He had no idea he was looking at the 5 deadliest butchers in all of Japan. The Oni King raised his bowl in a mock toast, his laughter a booming earthquake of sound that shook the very stones of his iron palace. They had made it inside. Now the real performance had to begin. Their lives and the fate of an entire country depended on it. The air in the great hall was thick with the smell of roasted meat, spilled sake, and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood and hot iron. Hundreds of Oni, giants of red, blue and black skin, roared with laughter, their voices a cacophony of grinding stones. They were a terrifying tapestry of muscle, fang and horn, their eyes glowing like embers in the torchlight. At the head of it all, slumped on a throne of jagged black rock, was Yura, the Oni King. He was a mountain of a demon, his skin the color of a deep bruise, a single massive horn spiraling from his forehead. He pointed a clawed finger, the size of a man's forearm, at Momotaro. "You," he boomed, "the little peach child. You have courage, or you are a fool. It is often the same thing." Momotaro, flanked by his companions, gave a low bow, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dog, the monkey, and the pheasant stood close, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. which was difficult when you were a talking animal in a demon's fortress. Every instinct screamed at them to run, to fight, to do anything but stand here and smile. But the plan depended on this. It depended on nerve. "Great King Yura," Momotaro said, his voice steady, projecting a confidence he absolutely did not feel. "We have heard of your strength and your magnificent feasts. We are but humble travelers who wish to see the legend for ourselves. We bring a gift, a humble offering from our homeland, to honor your hospitality." Yura grunted, a sound like an avalanche starting far away. He was intrigued. Oni were creatures of immense pride. They were also profoundly arrogant. The idea that their fearsome reputation had attracted not just fear, but admiration? It appealed to their vanity. They saw themselves not as monsters, but as rightful rulers, titans displaced from a celestial realm. To them, humans were little more than cattle or, at best, amusing pets. This display of respect from the Peach Child was a novelty. A gift. Yura rumbled, leaning forward. His shadow fell over them, a suffocating blanket of cold. What could a mortal bring that would interest me? This was the moment. The monkey with a nervous chatter stepped forward, holding a simple wooden box. He opened the lid and inside, nestled on a soft cloth, were several perfectly round, golden-brown dumplings. The kibidango. A wave of derisive laughter swept through the hall. "Dumplings!" one Oni bellowed, slapping his knee. "The boy brings us dumplings!" Another roared. "Perhaps he thinks we are sparrows." But Yura silenced them with a single sharp glance. He stared at the dumplings, a strange look in his massive, glowing eye. The dumplings weren't just food. They were a symbol. Millet was a staple of the common folk, the very people the Oni terrorized. To bring such a humble food into this hall of monstrous indulgence was either the ultimate insult or an act of supreme, baffling confidence. Yura, in his arrogance, chose to believe it was the latter. "You bring the food of peasants to the table of a king?" Yura asked, his voice dangerously soft. "The finest food of peasants, my lord," Momotaro replied smoothly. "Made with a special recipe passed down through my family. It is said to grant the strength of 100 men to anyone who eats it." Now that got their attention. Strength. Power. It was the only language the Oni truly understood. Their entire culture was built on it. Who was the strongest? Who could drink the most? Who could smash the most? The idea of a food that could amplify their already immense power was irresistible. Greed and pride, the two great failings of the Oni, lit up their faces. Yura gestured with his chin. "Bring them." The monkey, trembling slightly, carried the box to the foot of the throne. Yura reached down with two massive fingers and plucked a single dumpling from the box. He held it before his eyes, sniffing it. It smelled of sweet millet and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. A faint herbal scent that was both enticing and strange. He looked down at Momotaro, a final calculating gaze. Then, with a shrug, he tossed the dumpling into his mouth and swallowed it whole. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The entire hall was silent, watching their king. Then Yura's eye widened. A slow grin spread across his face, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth. "Ha! Ha 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 ha! It is true. I feel invigorated." He slammed his fist on the arm of his throne, cracking the solid rock. "Give them to all. Let us feast and feel the strength of 100 men." A wild cheer erupted. The Oni swarmed the box, grabbing the dumplings and stuffing them into their mouths. Momotaro had brought more, many more, in sacks that his companions now opened. And as the Oni ate the special kibidango, they called for more sake. Rivers of it. They drank straight from the massive barrels, pouring it down their throats, the potent rice wine mixing with the powerful herbs baked into the dumplings. The plan was working. The dumplings weren't magic in the way Momotaro claimed. They didn't grant the strength of 100 men. They were laced with a powerful, custom-made soporific. A sleeping draft so potent it could knock out a bear for a week, concentrated and refined to affect even the monstrous physiology of an Oni. Mixed with the sheer volume of alcohol they were consuming, it was a devastating combination. Momotaro and his friends played their parts perfectly. They toasted with the demons, drinking only water while the Oni guzzled their sake. They told grand stories, praised the Oni's might, and encouraged them to drink more, to celebrate their newfound vigor. The pheasant flew from shoulder to shoulder, refilling cups. The dog engaged in mock wrestling matches, cleverly tripping and disarming drunken Oni. The monkey performed incredible acrobatics, distracting them with his antics. Slowly but surely the tide began to turn. The booming laughter became sluggish. The sharp, glowing eyes grew heavy-lidded and dull. One by one, the colossal demons began to slump over. Some fell face-first into their meals. Others simply leaned back and began to snore. Their snores like the rumbling of a volcano. The great terrifying hall of the Oni King was becoming a nursery for gigantic, drunken beasts. But not all of them. And not the most important one. Yura, the Oni King, was still on his throne. He had eaten more dumplings and drunk more sake than any of them, but his constitution was on another level entirely. He was drowsy, his movements slow and clumsy, but he was not asleep. He squinted down at the hall, a confused, drunken haze clouding his vision. He saw his mighty warriors, his invincible army, passed out amongst the remnants of their feast. He saw the four small figures, the boy, the dog, the monkey, the bird, moving through the hall, not celebrating but watching, waiting. And then he saw the glint of steel. Momotaro was drawing his katana, the blade whispering from its sheath. The dog was baring his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The monkey held his staff, his playful demeanor gone, replaced by a cold focus. The pheasant circled above, its eyes like sharp little daggers. The fog in Yura's mind cleared in an instant, replaced by a firestorm of pure, unadulterated rage. He had been tricked, deceived, humiliated, by a child, a mortal child. He tried to roar, to bellow his fury, but the draft had thickened his tongue. It came out as a guttural, wet groan. He struggled to his feet, his massive body swaying. The iron palace, which had shaken from his laughter, now trembled with his rage. He grabbed his weapon, a colossal iron club, a kanabo studded with wicked spikes, that had been resting against his throne. Momotaro met his gaze from across the hall of sleeping monsters. There was no more performance, no more deception. The air crackled with a new tension, sharp and deadly. The feast was over. The real battle, the one that would decide everything, was about to begin. Yura raised his club, the movement slow but powerful like a continent shifting. And in that moment, Momotaro knew that putting the army to sleep was the easy part. Facing the waking nightmare on the throne, that was the impossible task. The club began its descent. It didn't whistle through the air. The air itself seemed to part for it, groaning under the pressure. It wasn't a weapon so much as a pillar of cast iron, a kanabo studded with spikes the size of a man's fist, and it moved with the terrifying, inevitable slowness of an avalanche. Momotaro had only a fraction of a second. He couldn't block it. He couldn't parry it. To meet that force head-on would be to become a red paste on the stone floor. He did the only thing he could. He dove. The ground exploded where he had been standing. The impact was not a crash or a bang. It was a deep, resonant boom that vibrated up through the soles of his feet and into his bones. Shards of rock, the size of dinner plates, flew through the air like shrapnel. The shockwave alone threw him forward, and he rolled, coming up on one knee, his ears ringing. He risked a glance back. A crater, a perfect circle of annihilation, smoked where the club had landed. Yura hadn't just tried to hit him. He had tried to erase the very spot he stood on. The Oni King grunted, a sound of mild annoyance, like a man who'd missed a fly with a swatter. He straightened up, his shadow swallowing the throne room, and hefted the kanabo back onto his shoulder with an almost casual ease. His single central eye fixed on Momotaro, and for the first time, the boy hero felt a tremor of true primal fear. This wasn't a beast. This wasn't a monster. This was a god of destruction. "You are quick, little peach." Yura's voice was a gravelly landslide. "But the mountain is patient. It will crush you all the same." Momotaro didn't answer. Words were useless here. He gripped the hilt of his katana, the blade a gift from the heavens, and charged. He was a blur of motion, closing the distance before the Oni could even begin to swing his club again. This was his only advantage, speed. He had to be a hornet to Yura's bear, a flash of lightning to his lumbering thunder. He leaped, aiming for the massive exposed knee. His blade sang as it cut through the air, a sliver of moonlight in the torchlit gloom. It struck true, and it bounced off. The clang of steel on something harder than steel echoed through the hall. It was like striking an anvil. The impact shot up Momotaro's arms, a painful jolt that nearly made him drop his sword. Yura's skin wasn't just thick. It was like living rock, a hide forged in the fires of Jigoku itself. The Oni King chuckled a low guttural rumble. He didn't even flinch. He simply swatted, a backhand motion with a hand the size of a small boat. Momotaro twisted in midair, barely avoiding the blow. The wind from the passing hand was a physical force, tearing at his clothes and throwing him across the room. He slammed into a stone pillar, the air driven from his lungs. He slid to the floor, gasping, his vision swimming with black spots. This was impossible. How do you fight a mountain? How do you cut stone with a sword? But he wasn't alone. A furious screech cut through the air. The pheasant, Kiji, dove from the rafters like a feathered dart. He wasn't aiming for the Oni's tough hide. He was aiming for the one soft target he could find: Yura's massive eye. The Demon King roared in annoyance, swatting at the bird. His attention momentarily diverted. As his head turned, a chattering shadow leaped from another pillar. Saru the monkey landed squarely on Yura's broad back, scrambling up towards his head, his sharp claws digging for purchase in the Oni's wild, wiry hair. At the same time, a low growl came from the floor. Inu the dog shot forward, a streak of white fur. He didn't try to bite the Oni's leg. He knew that was useless. Instead, he sank his teeth into the softer leather wrappings of Yura's sandal, pulling with all his might, trying to unbalance the giant. It was chaos. A beautiful, desperate, coordinated chaos. The king of demons, who had moments ago been an untouchable colossus, was now flailing, roaring in fury as he tried to dislodge the three pests who harried him from every direction. "Insects!" he bellowed, shaking his head violently to throw off the monkey. This was the opening. Momotaro forced himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He ignored the pain. He saw his companions, his friends, risking everything for him for this one chance. He would not waste it. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and his eyes fell upon Yura's other hand, the one not holding the club, which was currently trying to grab the monkey from his head. That hand was open, its fingers thick as tree branches. And on one of those fingers was a ring. A simple iron ring, but it pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. It was the source of the dread he felt, the heart of the fortress's dark power. He didn't run this time. He walked, deliberately, step by step, closing the distance as Yura was distracted. The pheasant swooped again. The dog pulled harder. The monkey chattered insults directly into the Oni's ear. Yura roared, finally grabbing the monkey and flinging him across the room. He raised a foot to stomp the dog, but it was too late. Momotaro was there. He didn't aim for the hand. He didn't aim for the ring. He aimed for the space between them. With a powerful upward slash, he brought his divine katana up, not against the Oni's invincible flesh, but against the knuckles, the joint where bone met bone. He put every ounce of his strength, every bit of his hope into that single precise strike. There was a sickening crunch, a sound of something ancient and powerful giving way. Yura's roar of annoyance turned into a scream of genuine, unadulterated agony. It was a sound that shook the very foundations of the island, a shriek of pure pain that no one had likely heard for 1,000 years. The Oni King dropped his kanabo, the weapon falling with a cataclysmic crash that cracked the floor. He staggered back, clutching his hand, two of his massive fingers now hanging at an unnatural angle, broken and useless. The iron ring clattered to the floor, its faint light flickering out like a dying ember. For the first time, the hero had drawn blood. Well, not blood, but something far more important: pain. He had proven the mountain could be broken. He had proven the god could feel. Momotaro stood his ground, sword held ready, his chest heaving. His companions, bruised but alive, regrouped behind him. The great Oni King cradled his shattered hand, his breath coming in ragged, furious gasps. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, murderous hatred. The air in the room grew cold, heavy. A strange pressure built, making the hair on Momotaro's arms stand on end. Yura slowly lowered his ruined hand. He looked at it, then he looked at Momotaro, and his one massive eye began to glow, not with torchlight, but with an internal hellish radiance. A deep violet energy crackled around him, a visible aura of raw power. The wounds on his knuckles began to steam, the flesh slowly, unnaturally, twisting itself back into place. "You have made a grave mistake, child of man." Yura's voice was no longer a landslide. It was the calm, terrifying whisper of a storm about to break. "You have only made me angry." The ground beneath his feet began to crack, not from his weight, but from the sheer, unholy power now pouring out of him. The real fight, Momotaro realized with a sinking heart, had just begun. The air itself grew thick, heavy with a pressure that felt like the bottom of the ocean. Yura's form seemed to swell, his muscles knotting into shapes that were no longer just powerful, but fundamentally wrong. His skin, once a deep crimson, now glowed with the dull, angry red of cooling embers. Horns that were once just menacing now twisted and grew, curling towards the stormy sky like blackened branches. And his eyes were no longer just gold. They were twin furnaces, burning with a hatred so ancient and so pure it felt like a physical force. This wasn't the proud, arrogant chieftain Momotaro had been fighting. This was the raw, unfiltered essence of an Oni. This was a natural disaster given flesh and fury. Yura didn't charge. He simply took a step. The ground didn't just crack, it splintered, shattering into a web of fissures from which a faint sulfurous steam began to rise. He raised his massive iron kanabo, the weapon now seeming less like forged metal and more like a shard of night itself. "You humans!" Yura's voice was a low growl, a tectonic rumble that vibrated in Momotaro's very bones. "You come to our homes, you brand us as monsters, and you call your violence justice. You think strength is a weapon you can wield. You are children playing with fire. Let me show you what real strength is." He swung the kanabo. It wasn't a swing of muscle and bone. It was a swing of pure, unadulterated rage. The air screamed as the club tore through it, and Momotaro, a hero born of divine favor, a warrior of impossible skill, could do nothing but throw himself to the side. He was fast, faster than any mortal man. It wasn't enough. The iron club missed him by inches, but the force of its passage was like a physical blow. It slammed into the earth where he had been standing, and the impact was not a thud but an explosion. Rock and soil erupted into the air. A shockwave tore across the courtyard, ripping flagstones from the ground and sending Momotaro tumbling through the air like a leaf in a hurricane. He landed hard, his body screaming in protest, the wind knocked from his lungs. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the panicked cries of his companions. The pheasant Kiji swooped from the sky, his sharp beak aimed for Yura's glowing eyes. It was an act of incredible bravery, an incredible futility. Yura didn't even bother to look. He backhanded the air, a casual, dismissive gesture. The motion was a blur, and Kiji was simply gone, sent spiraling into the fortress wall with a sickening crack. The monkey, Saru, agile and cunning, scrambled up the Oni's back, his claws seeking a purchase, his teeth bared to bite at the demon's neck. Yura's body suddenly pulsed with an intense, searing heat. Saru shrieked in pain, his fur singeing, and he leaped away, his hands and feet burned. Then came the dog, Inu. Loyal to the last, he charged, a low growl in his throat, and sank his teeth into Yura's calf. For a moment he held on, his powerful jaws locked. Yura looked down, not with anger, but with a kind of detached curiosity, as if noticing an insect. He lifted his leg, the dog still attached, and shook it once, a sharp, violent snap. Inu was thrown 20 feet, landing in a heap, whimpering. Momotaro pushed himself to his feet, his heart a cold knot of dread. His friends, his loyal companions who had crossed the sea with him, were broken and scattered in seconds. And Yura hadn't even treated it as a fight. He had treated it as an annoyance. "They are loyal," Yura rumbled, turning his molten gaze back to Momotaro. "A trait you humans praise yet rarely possess. They will die for you. Is your justice worth their lives, little peach boy?" The taunt hit its mark. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through Momotaro's fear. This wasn't just about a mission anymore. This was personal. He gripped the hilt of his katana, a gift from the gods, its steel humming with sacred energy. He was Momotaro, the boy who came from heaven in a peach to bring peace to the land. He would not fail. He charged. This time he didn't rely on strength. He relied on his miraculous birthright, on a speed and grace that was more than human. He was a blur of motion, a dance of steel and purpose. He ducked under another cataclysmic swing of the kanabo, the wind of its passage tearing at his clothes. He slid on the broken stones, using the Oni's own destructive wake as a path. He was under the giant's guard, inside his reach. With a powerful ki, a warrior's shout that focused all his spirit into a single point. He drove his blade forward. The holy steel meant to smite evil, bit deep into the Oni's thigh. It was like driving a sword through granite. The resistance was immense, but Momotaro poured every ounce of his strength, his lineage, his very soul into the thrust. The blade sank to the hilt. Black steaming blood, thick as tar, poured from the wound. Yura let out a roar, a sound of genuine pain this time, a sound that shook the very foundations of the island. He stumbled back a step, his glowing eyes wide with a flicker of surprise. He looked down at the sword buried in his leg, then back at Momotaro. For a single breathtaking moment, Momotaro felt a surge of triumph. He had done it. He had wounded the beast. He had proven that even a godlike monster could bleed. He braced himself, ready for the Oni to fall, to collapse under the weight of such a grievous, divinely inflicted wound. But Yura did not fall. Instead, a low chuckle rumbled in his chest. It started soft, then grew louder and louder until it was a booming, terrifying laugh that echoed off the mountains. "You did it!" the Oni bellowed, his voice dripping with a horrible, mocking amusement. "You hurt me. You actually hurt me. Brave little hero." Momotaro's blood ran cold as he watched, his victory turning to ash in his mouth. The muscles in Yura's leg began to writhe and twist around the blade. The black blood slowed, then stopped. The flesh, torn and ruined by sacred steel, began to bubble and knit itself back together. The edges of the wound pulled taut, sealing over the gash with a sickening, sizzling sound like water on a forge. In a matter of seconds, the skin was whole again, leaving nothing but a dark, fresh scar that was already beginning to fade. Then, with a casual grunt, Yura reached down, gripped the hilt of Momotaro's divine katana, and pulled it from his own leg as if it were a splinter. He held the legendary sword in his massive hand, examining it in the dim light. "A fine blade," he said, his voice dropping back to that dangerous, rumbling calm. "It carries the stench of prayers and purity, a weapon made to kill monsters." He looked directly at Momotaro, a cruel, knowing smile spreading across his demonic face. "But you see, boy, that is your mistake. You think you're here to kill a monster." He tightened his grip, and with a screech of protesting metal, the sacred katana, a gift from the heavens, bent and then snapped in two in his fist. "I am so much more than a monster." He tossed the broken pieces of the sword to the ground, where they clattered on the stones like cheap trinkets. Momotaro stared at the shattered blade, his heart sinking into an abyss of despair. His greatest weapon, his symbol of hope, was destroyed. His friends were defeated, and the demon before him, the demon was unkillable. Yura took another step forward, the ground groaning under his weight. The heat rolling off his body was now so intense it was hard to breathe. "Now," the Oni growled, raising his kanabo high, its shadow falling over the boy hero like a final judgment. "The lesson continues." The iron club descended not with a whistle, but with a roar, tearing the air apart. Momotaro didn't try to block it. He couldn't. To meet that force head-on would be to become a red smear on the obsidian floor. Instead, he did the one thing the Oni didn't expect. He dropped. He dove forward, sliding on the polished stone between the demon's legs as the kanabo crashed behind him, shattering the ground and sending splinters of rock stinging through the air. The impact shook the entire fortress. For a heartbeat, the Oni Yura was overextended, his balance thrown by the missed strike. And in that heartbeat, chaos erupted. A white blur shot past Momotaro low to the ground. The dog Inu, his teeth bared in a silent snarl, sank his fangs deep into the Oni's ankle. It was like biting a stone pillar, but the shock and the insult of it were enough. The Oni bellowed, a sound of fury and surprise, shaking his leg to dislodge the tenacious animal. At the same time, a chattering shadow leaped from the rafters. The monkey Saru landed squarely on the Oni's broad back, his sharp claws digging into the crimson skin, scrambling for purchase as he climbed toward the demon's head, aiming for the eyes. And from the air came a feathered dart. The pheasant Kiji swooped down, a flash of emerald and gold, his beak striking like a thrown dagger at the Oni's single massive eye. The great demon roared, truly enraged now, a tempest of pain and fury. He was no longer a teacher. He was a catastrophe. He swatted at the monkey, but Saru was too agile, leaping from his back to his shoulder. He tried to stomp on the dog, but Inu held fast, growling, worrying the thick hide. He shielded his eye from the pheasant, the great club swinging wildly, a force of pure destruction. Insects! Yura bellowed, his voice cracking the very stones. You think your little stings can fell a mountain? I am the earthquake. I am the typhoon. I am the rage of the earth that scours your flimsy little villages from existence. He finally shook the dog loose, sending him skidding across the floor, and with a sweep of his massive hand, he knocked the monkey from his shoulder. Momotaro was back on his feet, his sword held ready. He saw his companions, bruised but not broken, regrouping. He saw the Oni, a towering inferno of rage, turning his full murderous attention back to him. The heat, the pressure, the sheer malevolent presence of the creature was overwhelming. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. And then he remembered the dumplings. The kibidango. They weren't just food. The old woman had said they would grant the strength of 100 men. They were a gift, a promise, a piece of home. They were the power of community, of shared purpose, condensed into a single offering. He had shared them with his friends, and in doing so had forged a bond stronger than any steel. Now, Momotaro yelled, his voice cutting through the Oni's roar. It was a signal. The pheasant shot upwards, a distraction. The dog feigned a charge at the Oni's right. The monkey scrambled up a pile of stolen treasure, chattering and throwing gold coins. For a critical second, the Oni's attention was split. It was all Momotaro needed. He didn't charge the body. He charged the weapon. He sprinted forward, his blade held low. And as the Oni brought the kanabo around in a devastating horizontal sweep, Momotaro slid again. This time he wasn't just evading. His sword, a gift from the heavens, flashed upwards. It didn't strike the Oni's flesh, but the gnarled wooden haft of the great club, just below the iron head. The blade bit deep. There was a sound like a giant tree cracking in a storm, and the kanabo, the symbol of the Oni's power, splintered. The massive, studded iron head flew from its handle, tumbling end over end through the air and crashing into the far wall with the force of a cannonball. Silence. The Oni Yura stood frozen, his hand still holding the useless stick. He stared at the shattered remains of his weapon, then at the small boy standing before him, sword gleaming. The other Oni, who had been watching from the shadows, gasped as one. Their lord was disarmed. The mountain had been chipped. But it wasn't over. With a roar that was now laced with desperation, Yura threw aside the broken handle and lunged, his massive clawed hands reaching for the boy. But his rage made him clumsy. The dog was there in an instant, leaping and snapping at his knees. The monkey, from his perch, hurled a heavy bronze helmet that struck the Oni on the back of the head, making him stumble. The pheasant dove one last time, a feathered arrow aimed at his face. This coordinated assault, a dance of animal ferocity and human courage, finally broke the demon's charge. He staggered, off balance, his single eye blinking in confusion and pain. And in that moment, Momotaro saw his path to victory. He leaped onto a pile of silk bales, then to a stack of treasure chests, using the Oni's own ill-gotten gains as a staircase. He launched himself into the air, his sword held high, a small righteous comet against the cavernous darkness of the hall. He brought the sword down not on the Oni's neck, not in a killing blow, but flat-sided, striking the Demon King square on the crown of his head with all the force he could muster. The clang was deafening. It wasn't the sound of steel on flesh, but of judgment delivered. Yura, the great Oni king, crumpled. He fell first to his knees, his massive body hitting the floor with a groan that seemed to come from the island's very foundations. Then slowly he slumped forward, his forehead touching the cold stone in a posture of utter defeat. The fight was over. And in this moment of surrender, we see something crucial about the Oni's place in the Japanese psyche. Momotaro didn't kill the Oni king. He subjugated him. He defeated him and forced him to yield. This is a recurring theme. Unlike many Western tales where the dragon must be slain and the monster utterly destroyed, Japanese folklore often presents a different path: assimilation. The defeated Oni bows, pledges his allegiance, and promises to never again terrorize the land. He even returns all the treasure he has stolen and offers up his most prized possession: a magic mallet that can create anything one wishes for, and a cloak of invisibility. The monster isn't just vanquished. He's brought into the fold of order. He's a force of chaos that has been tamed and, in a way, civilized. This reflects a deep-seated concept in Japanese culture, influenced by Buddhism. the potential for redemption and change in all beings, even demons. The Oni represents a brutal, untamed aspect of nature and the human spirit. To simply destroy it would be to deny a fundamental part of existence. Instead, the goal is to understand it, overcome it, and integrate its power in a controlled, productive way. This leads us to one of the most fascinating paradoxes of the Oni: their transformation from terrifying villain to powerful protector. You can see this quite literally all over Japan even today. Look at the roofs of traditional temples and castles. You might see a terrifying demonic face sculpted into the tiles at the end of the roof ridge. This is an Onigawara, an Oni face tile. Its purpose? To ward off evil. The very image of the demon, the symbol of bad luck and disaster, is placed on the home as a guardian against those same things. The logic is beautifully simple. What better way to scare off evil spirits than by putting an even more ferocious-looking evil spirit on your roof to act as a bouncer? It's like fighting fire with fire. The greatest threat becomes the greatest protector. This duality is key. The Oni is a creature of the threshold, existing on the border between the human world and the spirit world, between civilization and wilderness, between destruction and protection. They are the embodiment of raw power, and that power is terrifyingly neutral. In the hands of a villain like Yura, it leads to plunder and fear. But once that power is respected and brought into alignment with order, it becomes a formidable shield. They are the ultimate test for heroes, and once passed, the hero doesn't just gain treasure. They gain the strength of the test itself. They turn their greatest adversary into their greatest asset. So the Oni is not simply a monster to be killed. It is a force to be reckoned with, a challenge to be overcome, and sometimes a guardian to be revered. It asks us to look at the things we fear most and consider the power they hold. It suggests that perhaps true strength isn't found in destroying our demons, but in having the courage to face them, tame them, and maybe, just maybe, put them to work. But this raises a profound question. If the most terrifying of demons can become a guardian, what happens when an Oni isn't just a converted villain, but is worshipped from the very beginning as a god? This is where the line between demon and deity dissolves into mist. In the West, the categories are often rigid. A thing is either divine or demonic, an angel or a devil. But in Japan, the spiritual landscape is far more fluid, more terrifying, and infinitely more interesting. Here, a god can have a demon's face, and a demon can command a god's power. To understand this, we must first look to a deity so fearsome, he was worshipped out of pure, unadulterated terror: Gozu Tenno, the ox-headed heavenly king. His origins are murky, likely traveling to Japan from the mainland, a syncretic deity blending Buddhist and Hindu figures. But in Japan he became something unique. He was a god of pestilence and disease. When a plague swept through a village, when smallpox ravaged a city, the people knew Gozu Tenno was walking among them. He was not a distant, abstract force. He was the sickness itself, an unstoppable divine entity with the head of an ox and the raw power of a storm. His appearance was pure Oni, horned, powerful, and utterly merciless. Prayers to Gozu Tenno were not gentle requests for blessings. They were desperate bargains. People offered him sacrifices, built him shrines, and held frantic festivals in his name, not to attract his favor, but to appease his wrath. The famous Gion Matsuri in Kyoto, one of Japan's most celebrated festivals, began as a ritual to placate Gozu Tenno and ward off the plagues he commanded. It was a citywide attempt to say, "Look upon our devotion, great and terrible one, and please pass us by." But the story of Gozu Tenno is also a story of transformation. Over centuries, his identity began to merge with one of Shinto's most volatile and powerful native gods, Susanoo no Mikoto, the god of storms and the sea. Susanoo himself was a complex figure, a hero who slew the eight-headed serpent Yamata no Orochi, but also a violent exile who threw a flayed horse into his sister's sacred weaving hall. He was a god of chaos and destruction, but also a protector. This duality made him the perfect vessel for the terrifying power of Gozu Tenno. Slowly, the horned plague god was absorbed into the persona of the storm god. The fear remained, but it was now part of a larger, more complex divine narrative. The Oni god had been integrated, his raw power given a place within the established pantheon. He shows us that sometimes, the only way to deal with the demonic force is to give it a throne and call it a god. This idea of divine, Oni-like fury is even more visible in two of the most iconic figures in the Japanese pantheon: Raijin and Fujin. You have seen them. They guard the entrances to countless temples, their muscular demonic forms frozen in dramatic poses. Raijin, the god of thunder, is often red-skinned, with sharp claws and a wild mane of hair, surrounded by a ring of drums which he beats to create the sound of thunder. His companion Fujin, the god of wind, is often green-skinned, equally monstrous, carrying a large bag of wind which he unleashes upon the world. They look for all intents and purposes like Oni. They are the embodiment of nature's untamable, destructive power. When a typhoon flattens a coastline, that is the work of Fujin. When lightning splits a 1,000-year-old tree, that is the fury of Raijin. Their origins are just as dark. In some tales, they were born from the decaying corpse of the primordial goddess Izanami, after she died giving birth to the fire god and descended into Yomi, the land of the dead. They are literally born from death and decay, beings of primordial chaos. And yet they are worshipped as kami, as gods. Why? Because the storm that destroys also brings the rain that nourishes the rice paddies. The thunder that terrifies is a sign of a life-giving downpour. Raijin and Fujin are not evil, they are amoral. They are forces of nature, as necessary as they are destructive. Their Oni-like appearance isn't a sign of malevolence, but a visual representation of their immense, untamable power. They are a constant reminder that the forces that sustain life are the very same forces that can extinguish it in an instant. They are the beautiful, terrifying truth of the natural world given demonic form and a divine title. From the fury of the natural world, we descend into the underworld, to the court of the great king who judges the dead, the mighty Enmyo. Known in other traditions as Yama in Japan, Enmyo is the supreme ruler of Mito, the Buddhist underworld. And he is terrifying. He is depicted as a colossal giant with a fierce red face, bulging eyes, and the robes of a Chinese judge. He presides over a vast bureaucracy of death, and his word is final. At his side are his two most famous assistants, Gozu and Mezu, the ox head and the horse face. These are his chief jailers, his enforcers, and they are unmistakably, unapologetically Oni. They are the ones who drag souls before Enma's throne, who administer the horrific punishments in the various hells, who embody the brute force of underworld justice. Enma himself, while a king and a bodhisattva in some interpretations, functions as the ultimate Oni. He is the great arbiter of karma. In his hands he holds a scroll detailing every single deed, good and bad, of the soul standing before him. He has a magical mirror that reflects every sin, every hidden crime, leaving the soul naked and exposed. His judgment is not based on whimsy. It is a cold, hard calculation of a person's life. And for those found wanting, the punishments are the stuff of nightmares, cauldrons of boiling oil, mountains of knives, eternal torture at the hands of his Oni minions. But here's the critical distinction. Enma's terror has a purpose. He is not a devil tempting mortals to sin. He is the consequence. His fearsome appearance and the horrors of his hells are meant to be a deterrent, a cosmic threat to inspire mortals to live virtuous lives. He is the ultimate tough love deity, a figure of fear who exists to promote morality. He is a demon king whose entire purpose is to uphold the sacred law. He proves that the face of a demon can sometimes be the face of justice itself. So how can this be? How can a god be a plague bringer, a storm fiend, a torturer of souls, and still be a god? The answer lies in a core Shinto concept, the dual nature of spirits, known as mitama. Every kami, every spirit, is believed to possess two souls. The nijitama, or the gentle soul, is the calm, benevolent, and protective side. This is the aspect that brings good harvests, peaceful weather, and blessings. But every kami also has an eremitama, the rough soul. This is the spirit's violent, destructive, and wrathful side. It is the earthquake, the typhoon, the plague, the volcanic eruption. The Oni-like gods, Gozu, Tenno, Raijin, Fujin, even Enmyo, can be seen as the ultimate expression of the eremitama. They are the raw, untamed power of the divine, unleashed and unfiltered. Worshipping them, building shrines to them, is an attempt to pacify that rough soul, to appeal to its better nature, and to transform that destructive energy into something protective. You don't pray to the eremitama for gentle blessings. You pray that it turns its terrible gaze away from you and towards your enemies. This shatters the simple good versus evil binary. In this worldview, destruction is not inherently evil. It is simply a part of the cosmic cycle, a function of divine power. And the Oni in these cases are not invaders from some separate evil dimension. They are the face of divinity itself when it chooses to be destructive, when it shows its rough and terrible soul. They are the gods we see in the storm cloud and the trembling earth. We've seen demons who become guardians and gods who wear the face of demons. We've explored the divine terror that commands worship through fear. But all these beings, from the lowly gatekeeper to the king of hell, were born as supernatural entities. This leaves one final, terrifying door to open. What happens when the monster isn't born in the heavens or the hells, but is forged in the heart of a mortal? What happens when a human being, through an act of supreme hatred, jealousy, or despair, crosses the line and becomes an Oni themselves? This is perhaps the most chilling question of all, because the answer reveals a terrifying truth. The most fearsome monsters aren't born, they're made. And the forge is the human heart itself. The line between a person and a demon is not a chasm, but a razor's edge, and it can be crossed when the soul is pushed to its absolute limit. When love curdles into obsession, when grief festers into unending rage, when jealousy becomes a poison that consumes all reason, that is when a human can become an Oni. These are not the mindless brutes we've discussed, the hulking ogres of Jigoku. These are beings of focused, intelligent, and deeply personal malevolence. Their power is born from a specific, searing pain, a betrayal so profound it rips a hole in the fabric of their humanity and lets the darkness pour in. And there is no story that illustrates this horrifying metamorphosis more vividly than the tale of a tea-house girl named Kyoheim. Her story begins not with thunder and lightning, but with the gentle scent of tea and the quiet beauty of a riverside inn. Kyoheim was a young woman of remarkable charm, the daughter of an innkeeper. One day, two Buddhist monks stopped at the inn on their pilgrimage. One was old and wise, the other, named Anshin, was young, handsome, and charismatic. Kyoheim was immediately captivated by him, and Anshin, perhaps flattered by the attention, or perhaps just careless with his words, made a promise. He told her he would stop at the inn again on his return journey from the mountains. To Anshin, it was likely a polite, throwaway comment. To Kyoheim, it was everything. She clung to that promise like a sacred vow. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Every traveler on the road, every distant figure was a potential Anshin. Her life, once simple, was now defined by a single burning point of focus: his return. Her affection began to warp, twisting from gentle fondness into a desperate, all-consuming obsession. She neglected her duties, her friends, her family. Her world shrank until it contained only the empty road and the phantom of a promise. Finally, the day came. Anshin was on the road, returning from his pilgrimage, but he had heard whispers of the girl's unsettling fixation. He felt a prickle of fear, a sense of a promise that had grown far beyond his control. So he made a fateful decision. He decided to avoid the inn. He chose a different path, hoping to slip by unnoticed. But you cannot hide from an obsession. Kyoheim saw him. She saw him deliberately pass by, his face turned away. And in that single moment, the world shattered. The love, the hope, the desperate waiting. It all collapsed inward and was reborn as a furious, white-hot betrayal. This wasn't just a broken promise. This was a lie that invalidated her entire existence for the past year. It was a humiliation that scorched her to the soul. She ran. She ran after him, her heart a drum of pure rage, screaming his name. Anshin, seeing the terrifying look in her eyes, ran faster. He was a monk, a man of peace, but what he saw chasing him was not a heartbroken girl. It was something primal. He reached the banks of the Hidaka River, where a ferryman was waiting. He begged the ferryman to take him across and to refuse passage to the woman following him. The ferryman, seeing the monk's raw terror, agreed. Anshin made it to the other side, looking back just in time to see Kyoheim arrive at the riverbank. She stood there, watching the boat that had carried her beloved and her betrayer to safety. She screamed his name, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and fury. And as Anshin watched in horror, something unbelievable began to happen. Her despair was so absolute, her rage so transcendent, that it broke her physical form. Her body contorted, her soft skin hardened and shimmered, taking on the texture of glistening scales. Her legs fused together, elongating into a massive, powerful tail. Her face, once beautiful, twisted into a demonic visage, her mouth splitting wide, fangs emerging from her gums. She threw herself into the churning waters of the Hidaka, No longer a woman, but a monstrous serpent of fire and hate. She had become an Oni, not by curse or by birth, but by the sheer, overwhelming force of her own broken heart. She swam the river in seconds, a great serpentine demon gliding through the water, propelled by an infernal energy. Anshin saw this monstrosity emerge from the water and ran for his life, his prayers turning to panic screams. He fled to the one place he thought would be safe, the famous temple of Dojoji. The monks there, seeing his plight and the demonic serpent in pursuit, took pity on him. They had a massive 1,000-pound bronze bell, one of the largest in the region. In a feat of desperate strength, they lowered the great bell over Anshin, hiding him within its thick metal shell. It was a fortress of bronze. Surely he would be safe. But they had not accounted for the nature of this new Oni. Kyoheim arrived at the temple, her serpentine form slithering over the sacred ground. She didn't need to find Anshin. She could feel him. She could smell his fear. She went directly to the great bronze bell. She did not try to lift it. She did not try to smash it. She did something far more terrifying. She began to coil her massive body around it. Once, twice, 7 times she wrapped herself around the bell, her scaled hide scraping against the bronze. The monks watched, paralyzed with fear, as this demon born of love embraced the bell that held the man who had spurned her. And then she began to breathe, not air but fire. A torrent of flame erupted from her demonic mouth, engulfing the bell. She was a living furnace, and her rage was the fuel. The 1,000-pound bell began to glow, first a dull red, then a cherry red, then a blinding liquid orange. The bronze itself began to melt and drip to the ground like tears of metal. Inside, Anshin's screams were muffled by the thick bronze, but the monks could hear them. They could hear him boiling alive, his body incinerated by the impossible heat. The bell had not been his sanctuary, it had become his coffin, his oven, his tomb. When the fire finally died down, Kyoheim, her vengeance complete, slithered away and threw herself into the river, her purpose fulfilled, her existence extinguished. The monks, trembling, eventually managed to lift the warped, molten remains of the bell. There was nothing left of Anshin but a pile of charred bones and ash. This is the terror of the human-turned Oni. Their power isn't random. It's specific. It is a direct and horrifying reflection of their earthly pain. A woman consumed by jealousy might become a Hashiheim, a bridge-dwelling demon who murders happy couples who try to cross. A warrior whose death is tainted by dishonor might return as an Oni whose sole purpose is to hunt down the descendants of his enemies. Their grievance doesn't die with them. It becomes their immortal engine. They are a walking, breathing cautionary tale, a reminder that the capacity for monstrousness lies dormant within the human spirit. It's a warning that our emotions, the very things that make us human, can also be the architects of our own demonic transformation. They prove that the most terrifying hell isn't a place you are sent to. It's a place you can create, right here on Earth, with nothing more than a broken heart and a soul set on fire by revenge. We have seen their power, their rage, their origins in both hell and the human heart. But a question remains, the most important question for any human living in a world stalked by such creatures. Are they invincible? Is there any weapon, any prayer, any strategy that can stand against a demon forged in the fires of damnation, or the crucible of human suffering? Or is humanity doomed to be their prey? The answer lies not with the demons, but with the legends who dared to fight back. For every terrifying force in the universe, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every shadow, a flicker of light. And for every Oni, there is a slayer. These aren't just men. They are legends forged in the crucible of desperation, paragons of courage who stared into the monstrous face of hell and refused to blink. Their stories are the bedrock of Japanese heroism, the proof that even when confronted with the supernatural, humanity's will to survive is the most powerful magic of all. And there is no greater Oni-slaying legend than that of Minamoto no Reiko and his war against the king of all demons, Shuten Doji. At the turn of the 11th century, the capital city of Kyoto lived in a state of perpetual fear. Young nobles and handmaidens were vanishing from the city streets, snatched away by an unseen evil. The source of this terror was traced to Mount Oi, a place that had become a literal demon fortress, ruled by the monstrous drunkard Shuten Doji. He and his legion of Oni would descend from their stronghold, drunk on sake and bloodlust, to raid the city and drag their victims back to their lair. The emperor himself, desperate to end the reign of terror, summoned the greatest warrior of the age, Minamoto no Reiko. Reiko was not just a samurai, he was a force of nature, and at his side were his 4 loyal retainers, the Shitenno, or 4 heavenly kings, each a legendary hero in his own right. Among them was the mighty Watanabe no Tsuna, a name we will return to. Reiko knew a frontal assault on a mountain teeming with demons was suicide. This enemy could not be defeated with brute force alone. It required cunning. Disguising themselves as Yamabushi, wandering mountain ascetics, Reiko and his men began the perilous journey to Mount Oi. As a final blessing for their quest, they were visited by 3 benevolent gods, who gifted them a helmet, a rope, and a flask of divine sake called Jinbin Kidokushu, a potent liquor, harmless to mortals but a paralytic poison to demons. Arriving at Shuten Doji's palace, a grotesque structure of iron and bone, they were met with suspicion, but their disguise held. They claimed to be lost monks seeking shelter. Shuten Doji, arrogant and perpetually drunk, laughed at the sight of them and invited them to join his feast. It was a scene straight from a nightmare. The Oni feasted on roasted human flesh and drank blood from skull-like cups. Reiko and his men, stealing their nerves, played their part, sharing their own special sake with their demonic hosts. Shuten Doji loved the divine liquor, demanding more and more, and he urged his followers to partake as well. He boasted of his gruesome exploits, of the terror he sowed, completely unaware of the trap being laid. To entertain his guests, he even revealed his true form. A colossal red-skinned titan, over 50 feet tall with 15 eyes and 5 horns. But soon the divine sake took its effect. The seemingly invincible demon king grew sluggish, his monstrous form slumping to the ground, paralyzed by the divine poison. This was the moment. Reiko and the Shitenno threw off their disguises, drawing their legendary blades. As Shuten Doji lay helpless, Reiko swung his own great sword, beheading the demon king in a single mighty stroke. But the nightmare wasn't over. Even severed from its body, the demon's head was still alive, fueled by pure malice. It flew through the air, jaws wide, attempting to bite Reiko's head off in a final act of vengeance. Only the divine helmet, a gift from the gods, saved him, its strength deflecting the demon's fangs. As the head crashed to the floor, finally dead, the Shitenno engaged the rest of the panicked, poisoned Oni, cutting them down in a furious battle. They freed the surviving prisoners and returned to Kyoto not as warriors, but as saviors, having slain the unslayable. The story of Reiko is one of strategy and divine aid, but other tales celebrate a different kind of hero. The story of Momotaro, the Peach Boy, is one of Japan's most beloved folktales. He wasn't a seasoned general, but a boy born from a giant peach found floating down a river by an elderly, childless couple. As he grew with unnatural speed and strength, tales reached his village of a band of Oni on a distant island on Onigashima, who raided the coastline, pillaging and hoarding treasure. Momotaro declared that he would defeat them. His adoptive parents, though worried, prepared for him the finest millet dumplings for his journey. Along the way he met a talking dog, a monkey and a pheasant. Each initially challenged him, but after sharing his dumplings, they pledged their loyalty to his cause. This unlikely fellowship, a boy of supernatural birth and his 3 animal companions, sailed across the sea to the demon island. Together they stormed the Oni fortress. The pheasant pecked at the demon's eyes, the monkey clawed their faces, and the dog bit their legs. Momotaro, wielding his katana, fought his way to the Oni chief and forced his surrender. He returned home not with a severed head, but with the Oni's plundered treasure, which he returned to the people, and the captured Oni chief as his prisoner. Momotaro's tale is a story of destiny, showing that heroism can come from the most unexpected places, and that strength is found not just in oneself, but in the bonds of friendship. Yet even within the legend of Reiko, there are smaller, more personal, and perhaps even more terrifying encounters. Watanabe no Tsuna, one of Reiko's 4 heavenly kings, has his own chilling tale. After the defeat of Shuten Doji, one of the demon's chief lieutenants, a fearsome Oni named Ibaraki Doji, escaped. One night, Tsuna was standing guard at the Rashomon Gate in Kyoto. A beautiful young woman approached, asking for an escort home, claiming she was afraid to travel alone. Tsuna, ever the gentleman, agreed, but as they walked, he glanced at her reflection in the water of a nearby river and saw not a woman, but the horned face of a demon. In an instant the woman transformed, grabbing him by the hair and trying to fly away into the sky. But Tsuna was no ordinary man. Unflinching, he drew his legendary sword, known as Hijikairi, or beard cutter, and with a single upward slash, he severed the demon's arm at the elbow. The Oni shrieked in pain and fury, disappearing into the night, leaving its grotesque, hairy arm still clutched in Tsuna's grasp. Tsuna took the arm home as a trophy, locking it in a chest. He knew the demon would be back for it. Days later, an elderly woman appeared at his door, claiming to be his long-lost aunt. She was so convincing, so warm and loving, that Tsuna let his guard down and allowed her inside. She asked to see the famous demon arm she had heard so much about. Reluctantly, Tsuna opened the chest. The moment the arm was revealed, the old woman transformed back into the one-armed Ibaraki Doji. The demon snatched its limb and burst through the roof, escaping for good. The story is a chilling reminder that the Oni's greatest weapon is not always their strength, but their cunning, their ability to wear our faces and exploit our trust. So what became of these demons? Were they all slain by heroes like Reiko and Momotaro? Of course not. The Oni never truly leave. Instead, humanity found a way to domesticate the fight against them. Every year on the day before spring, Japan celebrates Setsubun. During this festival, people throw roasted soybeans out their doors, or at family members wearing Oni masks, shouting Oni wa Soto, Fuku wa Uchi, demons out, fortune in. It is a ritualized cleansing, a symbolic reenactment of the ancient battles, pushing back the darkness of winter and welcoming the light of spring. The terrifying demon of folklore has been reduced to a caricature, a game for children, banished not by a sword, but by a handful of beans. And yet, the Oni are more powerful today than ever before, because they have conquered a new realm, our imagination. They are everywhere in modern pop culture. In the global phenomenon Demon Slayer, they are the tragic, bloodthirsty antagonists. In video games like Nioh and Onimusha, players become the demon slayers themselves. They appear as powerful villains and complex characters in countless manga and anime. From Dragon Ball to Jujutsu Kaisen, they have evolved from simple monsters into nuanced figures, sometimes villains, sometimes anti-heroes, their designs and powers more elaborate than ever imagined. The Oni persists because it is a reflection of something deeply human. It is the face we give to our fear of the unknown, to natural disasters, to disease, and to the darkness that resides within human hearts. The Oni is our capacity for rage, for greed, for cruelty made manifest. But the stories of the slayers also persist, as a reflection of our better selves. They are the embodiment of our courage, our ingenuity, our unity, and our unwavering belief that no matter how terrifying the darkness, a single well-aimed light can push it back. The battle against the Oni was never just about fighting monsters. It was, and always will be, about the eternal struggle for the soul of humanity itself.